The earliest cuneiform tablets discovered in the ancient ruins of Eridu and Uruk reveal a civilization grappling with memories of beings who existed before recorded history began. These clay fragments, some dating to approximately 3200 BC, contain references to entities described as those who watched from the heights of heaven and possessed knowledge that transformed primitive human settlements into sophisticated urban centers. The tablets from Eridu, considered by the Sumerians themselves to be the first city ever built, speak of divine instructors who descended during the time when the earth was young and the waters had not yet separated. Archaeological excavations at Eridu have uncovered 17 distinct building levels, with the deepest layers revealing architectural knowledge that appears to have emerged fully formed rather than through gradual development. The cuneiform texts from these levels describe beings called Abgallu, literally meaning great water beings, who taught humans the arts of irrigation, metallurgy, and urban planning. These tablets indicate that these watchers established the fundamental principles of civilization during what scholars term the Ubaid period, roughly 5,500 3,800 BC. The Uruk tablets provide additional detail about these primordial instructors. One particularly well-preserved tablet, catalogued as W20030-7 in the Vorderasiatisches Museum, describes 7 primary watchers who each governed specific domains of knowledge. The text states that these beings opened the eyes of the black-headed people, the Sumerian term for humanity, and gave them the me, the divine decrees that governed all aspects of civilization. The tablet explicitly mentions that these watchers possess the ability to see across the waters of time and could perceive events that had not yet come to pass. The Sumerian king list, composed around 2100 BC but drawing from much earlier sources, presents the most detailed account of the Apkallu and their relationship to antediluvian rulers. This document, preserved in multiple copies including the Veld Blundell prism housed in the Ashmolean Museum, describes a time before the Great Flood, when kings ruled for impossibly long periods, some for tens of thousands of years. The text specifically names 7 Apkallu, or sages, who served as advisors to these early monarchs. The first of these sages, Adapa, is described in the king list as he who completed the plans of heaven and earth. Mesopotamian literature portrays Adapa as possessing such profound wisdom that he accidentally broke the south wind's wing, causing Anu, the sky god, to summon him to heaven for judgment. The text reveals that Adapa's knowledge was so comprehensive that he understood the fundamental structures of reality itself, including the proper rituals for maintaining cosmic order. The second sage, Uana, appears in multiple Mesopotamian sources as the founder of the priesthood and the inventor of writing. Berossus, the Babylonian priest historian writing in the 3rd century BC, describes Uana as an amphibious being who emerged from the Persian Gulf to teach humanity the foundations of civilization. According to Berossus, Uana possessed a fish-like appearance, but could assume human form, and his teachings included mathematics, astronomy, and the proper construction of temples. The remaining 5 Apkallu, Enmeduga, Enmegalama, Enmebuluga, and Enlilda, and Utuabzu, each contributed specific knowledge domains that became essential to Mesopotamian civilization. The king list indicates that these beings worked in concert with human rulers to establish the first cities, create the earliest law codes, and develop the astronomical observations that would later influence calendrical systems throughout the ancient world. Linguistic analysis of the Sumerian and Akkadian terms for these watchers reveals a complex evolution of concepts that would later influence Hebrew and Aramaic traditions. The Sumerian word Ilu originally denoted any divine being, but in the context of the earliest texts, it specifically refers to entities who maintained constant surveillance over human activities. The Akkadian term Igigi carries connotations of beings who see from above and appears in context suggesting these entities possessed the ability to observe multiple locations simultaneously. The evolution of this term through Semitic languages demonstrates the persistence of the Watcher concept across cultures and millennia. The Hebrew word ayar, meaning watcher, which appears in the book of Daniel, derives from an Aramaic root that can be traced back to the Akkadian igigi. This linguistic continuity suggests that the concept of divine watchers was not merely mythological, but represented a consistent tradition of contact with non-human intelligences that spanned thousands of years. Archaeological evidence from Tel es-Sawan, located in central Iraq, provides physical support for the existence of advanced knowledge systems that predate known civilizations. Excavations conducted between 1964 and 1968 by Iraqi archaeologist Fuad Safar uncovered a settlement dating to approximately 6000 BC that displayed sophisticated understanding of astronomy, mathematics, and engineering. The site contains the earliest known examples of irrigation canals designed according to precise mathematical principles, suggesting access to advanced hydraulic knowledge. The pottery discovered at Tel es-Sawan exhibits decorative patterns that correspond to astronomical observations of remarkable precision. Analysis of these patterns by archaeoastronomer Alexander Thom revealed that the ancient inhabitants possessed detailed knowledge of planetary movements, lunar cycles, and stellar positions that would not be rediscovered by mainstream civilization for millennia. The mathematical relationships encoded in these decorative schemes indicate familiarity with concepts that modern scholars consider advanced mathematical principles. Similar evidence emerges from the pre-Sumerian site of Jarmo in the Zagros Mountains, where excavations have revealed architectural layouts that follow geometric principles of extraordinary sophistication. The buildings at Jarmo, dating to approximately 7000 BC, incorporate proportional relationships that mirror those found in much later Greek and Egyptian sacred architecture. The precision of these proportions suggests access to mathematical knowledge that far exceeded what should have been possible for a Neolithic agricultural community. The cuneiform tablets from Nineveh, part of Ashurbanipal's library, preserve copies of much earlier texts that describe the transmission of this advanced knowledge. One tablet, designated Care.3657 in the British Museum collection, explicitly states that the Watchers brought down from heaven the me of all crafts, and established the foundation of learning before the waters rose. The text indicates that this knowledge transfer occurred during a specific historical period, when the stars were in different houses, suggesting an astronomical dating system that places these events in the distant past. The Babylonian creation epic Enuma Elish, while composed much later, preserves traditions of primordial beings who possessed knowledge of cosmic structures. The epic describes entities called Anunnaki, who fixed the fates and established the ordinances of heaven and earth. These beings are portrayed as having existed before the current cosmic order was established, and as possessing the ability to manipulate fundamental forces of nature. Recent analysis of cuneiform mathematical texts from the Old Babylonian period has revealed computational techniques that appear to derive from much earlier sources. The Plimpton 322 tablet, dating to approximately 1800 BC, contains trigonometric calculations that demonstrate understanding of mathematical relationships not officially rediscovered until the Greek period. The sophistication of these calculations suggests transmission of knowledge from the pre-flood period, described in the Sumerian king list. The consistency of these accounts across multiple independent sources indicates that the Sumerian civilization inherited rather than developed its foundational knowledge. The sudden appearance of writing, complex mathematics, astronomical observation, and urban planning in Mesopotamia around 3500 BC represents a discontinuity in human development that conventional archaeological models struggle to explain. The cuneiform texts themselves attribute this knowledge to the intervention of the Watchers, providing a historical framework for understanding this rapid advancement. The implications of these discoveries extend beyond academic curiosity. The precision of the astronomical knowledge preserved in pre-Sumerian sites suggests observation capabilities that would have required sophisticated instruments or alternative methods of data collection. The mathematical principles encoded in early Mesopotamian architecture demonstrate understanding of geometric relationships that modern engineers recognize as optimal solutions to complex structural problems. The administrative structure that governed both celestial and terrestrial domains emerges from detailed analysis of the Anunnaki pantheon, revealing a complex hierarchy that extended far beyond the borders of Mesopotamia. The three primary figures who dominated this divine council, Anu, Enlil, and Enki, established territorial divisions that would influence human civilization for millennia. Their spheres of influence, as documented in the Sumerian administrative texts from Nippur and Babylon, demonstrate a systematic approach to planetary governance that treated Earth as a colonial outpost requiring careful management. Anu, whose name derives from the Sumerian An meaning sky, occupied the supreme position within the Anunnaki hierarchy. The Babylonian text known as the Enumeration of Anu describes his domain as encompassing the highest heaven, from which he issued the fundamental decrees that governed cosmic order. Archaeological evidence from the Anu ziggurat at Uruk reveals architectural features designed to facilitate communication between seamless earthly priests and celestial authorities. The structure contains acoustic chambers that amplify sound in specific frequencies, suggesting technological understanding of vibrational communication methods. The territorial assignments recorded in the Mesopotamian boundary stones known as Kuduru provide explicit details of Anu's earthly domain. These stones, dating from the Kassite period but preserving much earlier traditions, indicate that Anu's direct authority extended over the northern regions of Mesopotamia, particularly the area around modern-day Turkey and the Caucasus Mountains. The Kuduru texts describe this territory as the land where the Watchers first descended, and specify that certain mountain peaks remained forbidden to human settlement due to their continued occupation by celestial beings. Enlil's dominion encompassed the atmospheric realm and the central regions of Mesopotamia, with his primary earthly seat located at Nippur. The Sumerian hymn to Enlil, preserved on tablets from the Earth 3 period, describes his authority over weather patterns, agricultural cycles, and the movement of air masses across the planet. The text indicates that Enlil possessed technological capabilities that allowed him to manipulate atmospheric conditions on a regional scale, including the ability to generate storms, control rainfall, and alter wind patterns to support or devastate human settlements. The excavations at Nippur have revealed a complex of underground chambers beneath the Enlil temple that extend far deeper than necessary for conventional religious purposes. These subterranean structures, discovered by the University of Pennsylvania expedition between 1889 and 1900, contain sophisticated ventilation systems that maintain constant air circulation despite being sealed for millennia. The chamber walls display carved reliefs depicting mechanical devices that appear to be atmospheric monitoring equipment, suggesting that Enlil's weather control capabilities relied on advanced technological systems rather than supernatural powers. Enlil's territorial authority extended across the fertile plains of central Mesopotamia, encompassing the cities of Babylon, Kish, and Sippar. The administrative tablets from these cities reveal a coordinated agricultural system that maximized crop yields through precise timing of planting and harvesting cycles. The level of coordination required for this system indicates centralized control over agricultural planning across vast geographical areas, with local administrators receiving detailed instructions about optimal farming practices based on atmospheric and astronomical conditions. Enki's domain covered the subterranean realm and the southern regions of Mesopotamia, particularly the marshy areas near the Persian Gulf. Known as Lord of the Earth and Master of the Abzu, the freshwater ocean beneath the earth, Enki's responsibilities included management of groundwater systems, mineral extraction, and what the texts describe as the shaping of the clay people. The Sumerian text known as Enki and the World Order provides detailed descriptions of his technological capabilities, including the ability to purify water, extract metals from ore, and manipulate genetic material. The city of Eridu, considered Enki's primary earthly residence, contains archaeological evidence of advanced hydraulic engineering that predates known technological development by thousands of years. The site reveals a complex network of channels and reservoirs that controlled water flow with mathematical precision. The engineering calculations required for this system demonstrate understanding of fluid dynamics principles that would not be formally recognized until the Renaissance period. The territorial divisions established by these three primary Anunnaki leaders created a system of checks and balances that prevented any single entity from gaining absolute control over human development. The Mesopotamian text known as the Dialogue between Enlil and Enki describes ongoing disputes between these leaders regarding the proper treatment of humanity. Enlil advocated for strict control and periodic population reduction, while Enki favoured gradual education and technological advancement. These philosophical differences resulted in the establishment of separate human populations under different management systems. The Tablets of Destinies, known in Akkadian as Dup Shemati, represented the primary mechanism through which divine authority was transferred and maintained. These tablets, described in multiple Mesopotamian sources as containing the fundamental laws governing reality itself, functioned as both administrative documents and technological devices. The Epic of Anzu provides the most detailed account of these tablets, describing them as objects that granted their possessor control over natural forces and the ability to issue binding decrees that affected both divine and human realms. The physical description of the Tablets of Destinies in cuneiform sources indicates they were not conventional clay tablets, but sophisticated devices composed of unknown materials. The text describes them as shining like the stars and speaking with voices of thunder when activated. The tablets apparently required specific knowledge to operate, as the Epic of Anzu recounts the chaos that ensued when the bird demon Anzu stole them without understanding their proper use. The transfer of authority through the Tablets of Destinies followed established protocols that ensured continuity of governance while allowing for changes in leadership. The Babylonian text, when Anu the Sublime, describes ceremonies in which authority was formally transferred from celestial beings to human intermediaries. These rituals involved the physical handling of the tablets by designated human representatives, suggesting that the devices were designed to recognize and respond to specific individuals who had been genetically or technologically prepared for this responsibility. Archaeological evidence from the throne room at Meres provides physical confirmation of these authority transfer ceremonies. The excavations conducted by André Parrot between 1933 and 1955 uncovered a chamber containing a raised platform with metallic inlays arranged in geometric patterns that correspond to descriptions of the tablet activation ceremonies. The platform shows signs of intense heat exposure, indicating that the ceremonies involved energy discharge of considerable magnitude. The human intermediaries who received authority through the Tablets of Destinies were not ordinary rulers, but individuals who had undergone specific preparation that enhanced their capabilities. The Sumerian king list describes these enhanced rulers as possessing lifespans measured in thousands of years and abilities that surpassed normal human limitations. The text indicates that this preparation involved direct intervention by the Anunnaki, who modified selected individuals to serve as effective intermediaries between divine and human realms. The genetic manipulation described in Sumerian creation myths represents one of the most controversial aspects of ancient Mesopotamian literature. The Atrahasis epic, composed around 1700 BC but preserving much earlier traditions, provides explicit descriptions of the process by which the Anunnaki created modified humans to serve as workers and administrators. The text describes the mixing of divine essence with earthly clay to produce beings who possessed enhanced intelligence and longevity, while remaining fundamentally human in nature. The Atrahasis epic begins with a description of the original human creation as a response to labour shortages among the Anunnaki themselves. The text indicates that the lesser Anunnaki, known as the Gigi, had rebelled against the harsh working conditions imposed by their superiors. To resolve this crisis, Enki proposed creating a new type of being that could perform the necessary labour while freeing the divine beings for more important tasks. The epic describes this creation process in terms that suggest sophisticated understanding of genetic engineering principles. The goddess Nintu, working under Enki's direction, is described as mixing the clay of the earth with the blood of a slain god to create the first humans. The text provides specific details about this process, indicating that 14 pieces of clay were prepared, 7 to become males and 7 to become females. Each piece was implanted with divine essence and gestated for a specified period before being brought to life. The precision of these descriptions suggests actual technological procedures rather than mythological metaphors. The Akkadian version of the creation epic provides additional details about the genetic material used in human creation. The text identifies the slain god as Kingu, described as possessing intelligence and wisdom that would be transferred to the new beings. The epic indicates that this genetic material was carefully processed and refined before being incorporated into the clay matrix, suggesting understanding of genetic isolation and purification techniques. The results of this genetic manipulation, according to the Atrahasis epic, produced humans who possessed capabilities that exceeded those of purely natural beings. The text describes the first created humans as having lifespans of several hundred years, enhanced intelligence, and the ability to communicate directly with their divine creators. These enhanced capabilities gradually diminished over successive generations, requiring periodic intervention to maintain the desired characteristics in human populations. The Egyptian pyramid texts dating to the Old Kingdom period, around 2400 BC, contain parallel references to divine beings that correspond closely to the Sumerian Anunnaki hierarchy. The texts describe entities called Neteru, usually translated as gods but literally meaning divine principles or watchers, who establish the fundamental order of Egyptian civilization. These beings are portrayed as having descended from the sky to rule Egypt during a primordial period known as Zep Tepi, or the first time. The pyramid text of Unas, inscribed in the burial chamber of the last pharaoh of the 5th dynasty, contains explicit references to the Neteru as beings who came from the sky and established the throne of Egypt. The text describes these entities as possessing knowledge of astronomy, mathematics, and engineering that enabled them to construct monuments of extraordinary precision. The description of their capabilities closely parallels the technological abilities attributed to the Anunnaki in Mesopotamian sources. The territorial organization described in the pyramid texts reveals a system of divine governance that mirrors the Anunnaki hierarchy. The texts identify specific Neteru as rulers of different regions of Egypt, with Ra governing the southern regions, Pitar controlling the northern areas, and Thoth overseeing the central Nile Valley. This division corresponds to the Mesopotamian system, in which Anu, Enlil, and Enki maintained separate territorial domains. The pyramid text known as the Cannibal Hymn provides disturbing details about the relationship between the Neteru and human populations. The text describes the pharaoh as consuming the divine essence of these beings to acquire their knowledge and capabilities. This ritualistic consumption is portrayed not as metaphorical, but as an actual transfer of genetic or technological enhancement that allowed human rulers to exercise divine authority. The architectural evidence from Egyptian pyramid complexes supports the historical reality of the Neteru as technological beings rather than mythological constructs. The precision of pyramid construction, particularly the Great Pyramid at Giza, demonstrates engineering capabilities that exceed known ancient technologies. The mathematical relationships encoded in pyramid dimensions indicate access to advanced geometric principles that parallel the sophisticated knowledge attributed to the Sumerian Anunnaki. The underground chambers discovered beneath the Giza Plateau reveal construction techniques that mirror those found in Mesopotamian sites associated with the Anunnaki. These chambers, explored by teams led by archaeologist Mark Lehner, contain granite blocks fitted with tolerances measured in fractions of millimeters. The precision required for this construction suggests access to advanced cutting and shaping tools that have no equivalent in conventional ancient technology. The astronomical alignments of Egyptian monuments demonstrate coordination with Mesopotamian sites that indicates centralized planning across vast geographical distances. The orientation of the Giza pyramids corresponds precisely to stellar positions that were significant in Mesopotamian astronomy, suggesting that both civilizations received their astronomical knowledge from the same sources. This coordination extends to the timing of construction projects, which appear to have been synchronized according to celestial events that were important to both Egyptian and Mesopotamian divine hierarchies. The transmission of ancient Mesopotamian traditions into Hebrew literature becomes most apparent through careful examination of the first book of Enoch, a text that preserves detailed accounts of divine beings whose characteristics and activities mirror those described in Sumerian cuneiform tablets. The Enochic tradition, dating to approximately the 3rd century BC, but drawing from much earlier oral sources, describes a group of celestial watchers whose rebellion against divine authority and subsequent punishment parallels the Mesopotamian accounts of the Apkallu and their eventual banishment from human society. The opening chapters of 1 Enoch describe 200 watchers who descended to Mount Hermon during the days of Jared, the father of Enoch. These beings, led by figures named Semjaza and Azazel, are portrayed as having made a binding oath to violate divine commandments by taking human wives and teaching forbidden knowledge to mankind. The specific number of 200 watchers corresponds remarkably to Mesopotamian administrative records from Nippur that describe exactly 200 Igigi, lesser divine beings who served under the primary Anunnaki leadership before their rebellion against established authority. The Aramaic fragments of 1 Enoch discovered among the Dead Sea Scrolls at Qumran provide the earliest textual evidence for these traditions, with some fragments dating to the 2nd century BC. These manuscripts preserve detailed lists of the Watcher leaders and their specific areas of expertise, creating a taxonomy of forbidden knowledge that directly parallels the domains of the Sumerian Apkallu. Semjaza, described as the chief of the Watchers, taught humans the art of enchantments and root cutting, activities that correspond to the Mesopotamian traditions of Adapa mastery over natural forces and agricultural techniques. Azazel, the second-ranking Watcher in the Enochic hierarchy, receives particular attention for his instruction of humanity in metallurgy and weapon-making. The text describes how Azazel taught men to make swords, knives, shields and breastplates, while also instructing women in the use of antimony, eye paint and precious stones. This technological transfer mirrors the Sumerian accounts of Wana and Enmeduga, who are credited with introducing metalworking and craftsmanship to early human civilizations. The parallel extends to specific techniques, as both traditions describe the revelation of mining methods, or purification and alloy creation that transformed primitive societies into sophisticated urban centers. The geographical setting of the Enochic narrative centers on Mount Hermon, located on the border between modern-day Lebanon and Syria. This mountain, rising to 2,814 meters above sea level, occupies a position of strategic importance that controlled ancient trade routes between Mesopotamia and the Mediterranean coast. Archaeological surveys of Mount Hermon, conducted by the Israel Antiquities Authority, have revealed extensive remains of ancient religious installations, including massive stone circles and megalithic structures that predate known historical settlements in the region. The summit of Mount Hermon contains the ruins of a temple complex that exhibits construction techniques similar to those found at Mesopotamian sites associated with the Anunnaki. The foundation stones, some weighing over 20 tons, are fitted together with precision that requires advanced engineering capabilities. The orientation of these structures aligns with astronomical phenomena that were significant in Mesopotamian celestial observations, suggesting coordination between the religious activities conducted at Mount Hermon and the divine hierarchies described in cuneiform literature. The Enochic tradition's emphasis on Mount Hermon as the descent point for the Watchers corresponds to Mesopotamian accounts of sacred mountains, serving as interfaces between celestial and terrestrial domains. The Sumerian concept of the Akur, literally meaning mountain house, described specific elevated locations where divine beings maintained permanent installations for communication with their cosmic superiors. The ziggurat complexes throughout Mesopotamia were designed as artificial mountains that replicated the function of natural sacred peaks like Mount Hermon. The technological knowledge attributed to the Enochic Watchers encompasses the same domains described in Sumerian texts regarding the Apkallu. Barakel taught astronomy and the observation of celestial bodies, while Kokobel instructed humans in the interpretation of stellar omens and the calculation of celestial cycles. These astronomical teachings parallel the Mesopotamian traditions of Enmegalama and Enmebiluga, who established the mathematical foundations for tracking planetary movements and predicting eclipses. The metallurgical knowledge transmitted by the Watchers included techniques that were unknown to contemporary Bronze Age civilizations. The Enochic texts describe the revelation of iron-working methods that would not become widespread in the ancient Near East until several centuries later. This technological anachronism suggests that the traditions preserved in 1 Enoch derive from sources that possessed advanced metallurgical knowledge during periods when such techniques were not yet available to human societies. The magical practices taught by the Watchers encompass divination methods that correspond precisely to those described in Mesopotamian ritual texts. Abmaros taught the resolving of enchantments, while Tamiel instructed humans in astronomical divination and the interpretation of celestial omens. These practices required detailed knowledge of mathematical calculations and astronomical observations that parallel the sophisticated systems developed by Mesopotamian priests under the guidance of the Apkallu. The punishment narrative described in 1 Enoch provides crucial parallels to Mesopotamian accounts of divine rebellion and subsequent banishment. The text describes how the Watchers were bound in the valleys of the earth and condemned to witness the destruction of their offspring before facing final judgment. This punishment corresponds to Sumerian traditions, describing the banishment of certain Apkallu following their violation of divine protocols regarding human interaction. The Mesopotamian text known as the Bit Meseri describes a similar punishment for divine beings who exceeded their authority in dealing with human populations. These beings were stripped of their administrative positions and confined to specific geographical locations where they could no longer influence human development. The parallel extends to the specific nature of the punishment, which involved forced observation of the consequences of their unauthorized interventions. The offspring of the Watchers, described in 1 Enoch as giants called Nephilim, correspond to Mesopotamian accounts of hybrid beings created through unauthorized genetic manipulation. The Sumerian text known as the Marriage of Martu describes the creation of beings who possessed both divine and human characteristics, but were considered abominations by the primary divine authorities. These beings are portrayed as possessing great physical strength and intelligence, but lacking the spiritual qualities necessary for proper integration into either divine or human societies. The destruction of these hybrid beings through a great flood represents a common element in both Enochic and Mesopotamian traditions. The flood narrative in 1 Enoch describes divine intervention to eliminate the corrupted bloodlines that resulted from unauthorized mixing between celestial and terrestrial genetic material. This account parallels the Mesopotamian flood traditions preserved in the Epic of Gilgamesh and the Atrahasis epic, which describes similar divine decisions to reset human civilization through catastrophic intervention. The preservation of certain human bloodlines through the flood represents another parallel between Enochic and Mesopotamian traditions. Both accounts describe specific individuals who received advance warning and detailed instructions for surviving the catastrophe. Noah in the Enochic tradition corresponds to Utnapishtim in the Mesopotamian accounts, with both figures receiving technological knowledge necessary for constructing survival vessels and preserving selected genetic material through the disaster. The post-flood period described in both traditions involves the re-establishment of human civilization under modified divine supervision. The Enochic texts describe how certain watchers remained active in human affairs despite the general prohibition against direct intervention. These authorized watchers provided limited technological assistance, while maintaining strict protocols to prevent the repetition of earlier unauthorized activities. The linguistic connections between Enochic and Mesopotamian traditions extend beyond thematic parallels to include specific terminology and conceptual frameworks. The Aramaic term Ayar, used in 1 Enoch to designate watchers, derives from roots that can be traced to Akkadian Igigi, while the Hebrew Nephilim corresponds to the Sumerian Anunnaki in its designation of beings who descended from heaven to earth. The transmission of these traditions from Mesopotamian to Hebrew sources appears to have occurred through multiple channels during the Babylonian exile period. The Jewish communities established in Mesopotamia during the 6th century BC would have had access to cuneiform libraries that preserved ancient traditions regarding the Anunnaki and Apkallu. The synthesis of these traditions with existing Hebrew theological frameworks resulted in the distinctive perspective presented in 1 Enoch. The technological knowledge described in both traditions includes specific techniques that were not available to ancient civilizations through conventional development. The astronomical calculations preserved in both Enochic and Mesopotamian sources demonstrate understanding of celestial mechanics that required sophisticated mathematical tools and observational equipment. The metallurgical processes described in both traditions involve chemical procedures that were not rediscovered until much later historical periods. The architectural knowledge attributed to both the Watchers and the Apkallu includes construction techniques that appear in archaeological sites throughout the ancient Near East. The precision stone-cutting methods described in these texts correspond to physical evidence found at sites like Baalbek in Lebanon, where foundation stones weighing hundreds of tons are fitted together with tolerances measured in millimeters. These construction techniques require tools and methods that exceed conventional ancient capabilities. The mathematical knowledge transmitted by both traditions encompasses geometric principles that were not formally recognized until the classical Greek period. The proportional relationships described in both Enochic and Mesopotamian texts appear in the architectural layouts of ancient monuments throughout the region, suggesting practical application of advanced mathematical concepts by ancient builders working under divine guidance. The medical knowledge attributed to the Watchers includes pharmaceutical techniques that involve the preparation of complex chemical compounds from mineral and plant sources. These preparations are described as having effects that exceeded conventional herbal remedies, suggesting understanding of chemical processes that would not be formally recognized until the development of modern pharmacology. The ancient Egyptian records preserve detailed accounts of a primordial period known as Zep Tepi, the first time, when divine beings established the foundations of pharaonic civilization. The Turin King List, a papyrus dating to the reign of Ramesses II but drawing from much earlier sources, contains explicit references to rulers who governed Egypt before the first human dynasties. These divine monarchs, described as Neteru or god kings, are recorded as having reigned for periods measured in thousands of years, establishing the fundamental institutions that would characterize Egyptian civilization for millennia. The Turin Papyrus, discovered by Italian explorer Bernardino Drovetti in 1822, presents a chronological sequence that begins with the rule of Ptah, followed by Ra, Shu, Geb, Osiris, Seth, and Horus. Each of these divine rulers is credited with introducing specific technologies and administrative systems that transformed the Nile Valley from a collection of primitive settlements into a unified kingdom. The papyrus indicates that Ptah's reign lasted 9,000 years, during which he established the principles of architecture and metallurgy that would later characterize Egyptian construction techniques. Manetho's Egyptiaca, composed during the 3rd century BC while serving as high priest at Heliopolis, provides additional details about the Zep Tepi period that complement the Turin King List. Manetho's account, preserved in fragments by later historians including Josephus and Eusebius, describes the divine rulers as beings who possessed knowledge of astronomy, mathematics and engineering that far exceeded human capabilities. The text indicates that these rulers established the calendar system, developed hieroglyphic writing, and created the architectural principles that governed temple construction throughout Egyptian history. The correlation between Manetho's divine rulers and the Mesopotamian Anunnaki becomes apparent through detailed analysis of their attributed domains and capabilities. Ptah's role as creator god and master of craftsmanship directly parallels Enki's position as the Mesopotamian deity, responsible for technological innovation and genetic manipulation. Both figures are described as possessing the ability to shape matter according to divine principles, and as having taught humans the fundamental arts of civilization. Ra's dominion over solar phenomena and his role as supreme ruler corresponds closely to Anu's position as head of the Mesopotamian divine hierarchy. Both entities are portrayed as maintaining oversight of cosmic order while delegating specific administrative responsibilities to subordinate divine beings. The astronomical knowledge attributed to Ra in Egyptian sources mirrors the celestial expertise assigned to Anu in cuneiform texts, including the ability to predict eclipses and calculate planetary movements with extraordinary precision. The administrative structure described in Egyptian sources for the Zep Tepi period reveals organizational principles that mirror those found in Mesopotamian accounts of Anunnaki governance. The Palermo stone, a basalt stela dating to the 5th dynasty, preserves records of the divine rulers that indicate a systematic approach to territorial management and resource allocation. The stone describes how each divine ruler maintained specific geographical domains while coordinating activities across the entire Nile Valley through a network of subordinate administrators. Archaeological evidence from Hierakonpolis, located in Upper Egypt near modern-day Edfu, provides physical confirmation of advanced technological capabilities during the pre-dynastic period. Excavations conducted by James Quibble and Frederick Green between 1897 and 1899 uncovered artifacts that demonstrate sophisticated understanding of metallurgy, astronomy, and hydraulic engineering that predates the establishment of the first pharaonic dynasties by several centuries. The Hierakonpolis painted tomb, designated Tomb 100 in archaeological records, contains wall paintings that depict beings with characteristics that correspond to descriptions of the Mesopotamian Anunnaki. These figures are portrayed as taller than ordinary humans, wearing distinctive headgear that suggests technological rather than ceremonial function, and carrying objects that appear to be sophisticated tools or instruments. The artistic style and symbolic content of these paintings show clear influences from Mesopotamian iconographic traditions, suggesting direct cultural contact between pre-dynastic Egypt and the civilizations of the Tigris-Euphrates Valley. The Naqada culture artifacts discovered throughout Upper Egypt reveal technological capabilities that appear to have emerged fully formed rather than through gradual development. The Naqada II period, dating to approximately 3,200 BC, produced pottery decorated with astronomical motifs that demonstrate detailed knowledge of stellar movements and planetary cycles. Analysis of these decorative patterns by archaeoastronomer Giulio Magli revealed mathematical relationships that correspond to Mesopotamian astronomical calculations preserved in cuneiform tablets. The metallurgical artifacts from Naqada sites include copper and gold objects that exhibit sophisticated alloying techniques and precision manufacturing methods. The Pitt Rivers Museum's collection of Naqada metalwork contains examples of copper tools that show evidence of advanced smelting processes and quality control measures that were not supposed to exist in pre-dynastic Egypt. The chemical composition of these artifacts indicates access to ore sources and purification methods that parallel those described in Mesopotamian texts regarding the technological knowledge transmitted by the Apkallu. The shared iconography between early Sumerian cylinder seals and pre-dynastic Egyptian artifacts provides compelling evidence for direct cultural transmission between these civilizations. The serpent symbolism that appears prominently in both traditions carries identical meanings and appears in similar contexts across both cultures. The Mesopotamian cylinder seal known as the Temptation Seal, housed in the British Museum, depicts a tree flanked by two seated figures with a serpent positioned behind one of the figures. This composition appears in virtually identical form in pre-dynastic Egyptian artifacts, including ivory knife handles from Gebel el-Arak that date to approximately 3,300 BC. The bird symbolism present in both traditions demonstrates even more specific parallels in meaning and representation. The Mesopotamian Anzu bird, described in cuneiform texts as a divine being capable of flight and possessing technological knowledge, appears in nearly identical form in Egyptian depictions of the Bennu bird. Both entities are associated with solar symbolism, technological knowledge, and the ability to traverse between celestial and terrestrial realms. The consistency of these representations across different cultures suggests derivation from common sources rather than independent development. The Abydos king list, carved into the walls of Seti Van's temple at Abydos during the 19th dynasty, contains mysterious early entries that appear to correlate with Mesopotamian records of antediluvian rulers. The list begins with entries that use archaic hieroglyphic forms and reference rulers whose names do not appear in any other Egyptian sources. These early entries describe reigns of extraordinary duration and attribute technological achievements to these rulers that parallel those assigned to the Mesopotamian kings who ruled before the Great Flood. The chronological calculations preserved in the Abydos king list indicate that the earliest rulers governed Egypt during periods that correspond to the antediluvian period described in the Sumerian king list. The mathematical relationships between the reign lengths recorded in both sources suggest coordination between Egyptian and Mesopotamian chronological systems that extends back to the earliest periods of recorded history. This coordination implies communication between the divine hierarchies that governed both regions and shared planning for human civilizational development. The hieroglyphic inscriptions accompanying the early entries in the Abydos king list include symbols that do not appear in standard Egyptian writing, but correspond to cuneiform signs used in Mesopotamian texts to designate divine beings. The presence of these foreign symbols in official Egyptian royal inscriptions indicates that the early rulers possessed knowledge and authority that derived from sources outside the Nile Valley. The specific symbols used correspond to Mesopotamian designations for the Anunnaki and Apkallu, suggesting direct connection between Egyptian divine rulers and Mesopotamian celestial hierarchies. The technological knowledge demonstrated in pre-dynastic Egyptian sites includes hydraulic engineering capabilities that mirror those found in Mesopotamian installations associated with Enki and the Apkallu. The Fayum Depression, located southwest of modern Cairo, contains evidence of sophisticated water management systems that predate known Egyptian engineering capabilities by thousands of years. These systems include underground channels carved through solid rock with precision that requires advanced cutting tools and surveying equipment. The astronomical alignments incorporated into pre-dynastic Egyptian monuments demonstrate coordination with Mesopotamian sites that indicates centralized planning across vast geographical distances. The stone circle at Nabta Playa, located in the Nubian desert and dating to approximately 4,800 BC, incorporates stellar alignments that correspond precisely to those used in Mesopotamian astronomical observations. The mathematical precision required for this coordination suggests access to sophisticated communication methods and shared astronomical databases. The genetic evidence preserved in pre-dynastic Egyptian mummies reveals characteristics that distinguish them from later Egyptian populations. Analysis conducted by the German Mummy Project has identified genetic markers in pre-dynastic remains that are more closely related to populations from the ancient Near East than to indigenous African groups. These genetic patterns suggest population movements or direct intervention that introduced foreign genetic material into the Nile Valley during the pre-dynastic period. The architectural techniques demonstrated in pre-dynastic Egyptian construction include stone-cutting methods that parallel those found in Mesopotamian sites associated with the Anunnaki. The megalithic structures at Saqqara, predating the famous step pyramid by several centuries, exhibit precision fitting and massive stone weights that require advanced engineering capabilities. The construction methods used at these sites correspond to techniques described in Mesopotamian texts as having been taught by divine instructors. The mathematical knowledge encoded in pre-dynastic Egyptian monuments includes geometric principles that appear in Mesopotamian architectural layouts associated with divine construction projects. The proportional relationships found in early Egyptian temple foundations correspond to those described in cuneiform texts as divine architectural principles revealed by the Apkallu. These mathematical constants appear consistently across both cultures, suggesting transmission of standardized architectural knowledge from common sources. The linguistic connections between pre-dynastic Egyptian and Mesopotamian cultures extend beyond shared iconography to include common terminology for technological and administrative concepts. The Egyptian word Netja, used to designate divine beings, derives from roots that correspond to the Mesopotamian Igigi, while Egyptian architectural terms show clear derivation from Sumerian and Akkadian technical vocabulary. These linguistic parallels indicate sustained cultural contact and knowledge transfer between the two regions during the formative periods of both civilizations. The preservation of Mesopotamian flood traditions in Egyptian sources provides additional evidence for shared historical experiences between these cultures. The Egyptian text known as the Admonitions of Ipusa describes a great catastrophe that destroyed earlier civilizations and required the re-establishment of human society under divine guidance. This account parallels Mesopotamian flood narratives in specific details, including the preservation of selected individuals and the revelation of new technologies necessary for post-catastrophe reconstruction. The medical knowledge preserved in pre-dynastic Egyptian sources includes pharmaceutical techniques that correspond to those described in Mesopotamian texts attributed to divine instruction. The Edwin Smith Papyrus, though dating to a later period, preserves medical knowledge that demonstrates understanding of anatomical principles and surgical procedures that exceed conventional ancient capabilities. The sophistication of these techniques suggests transmission from the advanced knowledge systems established during the Zep Tepi period. The convergence of flood narratives across ancient civilizations reveals a catastrophic event so profound that it fundamentally altered human consciousness and technological development. The Sumerian account of Ziusudra, preserved in the fragmentary tablets from Nippur dating to approximately 2100 BC, provides the earliest written record of this global catastrophe. The cuneiform text describes Ziusudra as a priest-king of Shuruppak, who received direct warnings from Enki about an impending deluge, designed to eliminate human civilization. Unlike later flood narratives that emphasize divine wrath, the Sumerian version presents the catastrophe as a calculated decision by the Anunnaki Council to reset human development after unauthorized genetic experimentation had corrupted the original human template. The Ziusudra narrative contains technical specifications for survival that suggest advanced engineering knowledge rather than primitive boat-building techniques. The tablet fragments describe a vessel constructed according to precise mathematical ratios, with specific instructions for waterproofing using bitumen and pitch, applied in carefully calculated layers. The text indicates that Ziusudra received detailed plans that included compartmentalization schemes, ventilation systems, and storage configurations optimized for long-term survival at sea. These specifications demonstrate understanding of naval architecture principles that would not be formally recognized until much later historical periods. The Akkadian version preserved in the Epic of Gilgamesh expands upon the Sumerian account through the character of Utnapishtim, whose name translates as "he who found life." The 11th tablet of the epic, discovered in Ashurbanipal's library at Nineveh, provides additional details about the flood's duration and the technological assistance provided by Enki. Utnapishtim's account describes receiving not only construction plans but also navigational instruments and weather prediction methods that enabled him to survive conditions that destroyed all other human settlements. The Gilgamesh version introduces elements that suggest the flood was not merely a natural disaster, but involved technological intervention by the Anunnaki. Utnapishtim describes how Enlil unleashed the weapons of the storm and how the Igigi lit up the land with their lightning. The text indicates that atmospheric manipulation technology was employed to generate unprecedented rainfall and storm conditions that exceeded natural meteorological phenomena. The description of the flood's onset includes references to the dikes of the heavens being opened and the foundations of the earth being torn up, suggesting coordinated assault on both atmospheric and geological systems. The archaeological evidence for catastrophic flooding in Mesopotamia during the early 3rd millennium BC provides physical confirmation of these textual accounts. Excavations at conducted by Leonard Woolley between 1922 and 1934 uncovered a sterile clay layer approximately 8 feet thick that separated earlier cultural deposits from later Sumerian civilization. This layer, dated to approximately 2900 BC through stratigraphic analysis, represents a flood event of extraordinary magnitude that covered the entire southern Mesopotamian plain to depths that would have eliminated all surface settlements. Similar flood deposits have been identified at Kish, Uruk, Lagash, and Shuruppak, indicating that the catastrophe affected the entire region simultaneously. The uniformity of these deposits across such a vast geographical area suggests that the flooding resulted from coordinated causes rather than localized weather events. The sediment composition includes materials that originated from sources hundreds of kilometers away, indicating water velocities and volumes that exceeded anything produced by normal river flooding. The Shuruppak excavations, conducted by German archaeologist Robert Koldewey, revealed evidence of hasty abandonment preceding the flood event. Houses contained valuable objects left in place, suggesting that the inhabitants received little warning before the catastrophe struck. However, certain buildings show evidence of deliberate preparation, with sealed chambers containing cuneiform tablets and artifacts that appear to have been specifically preserved for post-flood recovery. These prepared caches correspond to the textual accounts describing how selected knowledge was preserved through divine intervention. The global distribution of flood narratives across cultures that had no apparent contact with Mesopotamian civilization indicates that the catastrophe affected regions far beyond the Tigris-Euphrates valley. The Hindu Puranas describe Manu's survival of a great deluge through divine assistance from Vishnu, who appeared as a fish to guide Manu's vessel to safety. The Puranic account includes technical details about the construction of the survival vessel that parallel the specifications given to Ziusudra and Utnapishtim, suggesting derivation from common technological sources. The Aztec legend of Coxcoxtli describes a great flood that destroyed the fourth sun, with Coxcoxtli and his wife Xochiquetzal surviving in a vessel that was guided by divine beings to Mount Colhuacan. The Mexican account includes descriptions of advanced warning systems and technological assistance that mirror the Mesopotamian narratives. The consistency of these details across cultures separated by vast distances and time periods indicates that the flood event was genuinely global in scope and involved coordinated intervention by technologically advanced beings. The Chinese flood legends preserved in the Shu Jing describe Yu the Great's efforts to control catastrophic flooding that lasted for generations. The Chinese accounts include detailed descriptions of hydraulic engineering projects that required advanced mathematical calculations and construction techniques. These projects involve the creation of channels and reservoirs that redirected floodwaters according to precise topographical surveys, suggesting access to sophisticated surveying equipment and hydrological modelling capabilities. The preservation of knowledge through the flood represents one of the most significant aspects of these narratives, as it explains how advanced technological information survived the catastrophe to influence post-Diluvian civilizations. The Sumerian account describes how Enki instructed Ziusudra to preserve not only human and animal life, but also the Me, the divine decrees that contained the fundamental principles governing civilization. These Me included mathematical constants, astronomical data, metallurgical formulas, and architectural specifications that would be essential for rebuilding human society after the waters receded. The Mesopotamian text known as the Instructions of Shurapak provide specific details about the knowledge preservation protocols implemented before the flood. The text describes how selected individuals were trained in memory techniques that enabled them to preserve vast amounts of technical information without written records. These human repositories were distributed across different geographical regions to ensure that the knowledge would survive even if some preservation sites were destroyed during the catastrophe. The Apkallu played crucial roles in the knowledge preservation effort, according to multiple Mesopotamian sources. The text known as the Seven Sages describes how each of the 7 primary Apkallu was assigned responsibility for preserving specific domains of knowledge. Adapa preserved astronomical and mathematical information, while Uana maintained architectural and engineering specifications. The text indicates that these beings possessed technological methods for encoding vast amounts of data into compact formats that could survive environmental destruction. The physical preservation methods described in Mesopotamian sources included the creation of underground repositories equipped with environmental controls that protected stored materials from flood damage. The Babylonian text, when Anu the Sublime describes sealed chambers carved into bedrock and fitted with drainage systems that prevented water infiltration. These chambers contained not only written records, but also technological artifacts and material samples that would enable rapid reconstruction of pre-flood capabilities. The post-flood emergence of advanced civilizations in multiple regions demonstrates the effectiveness of these preservation efforts. The sudden appearance of sophisticated urban centers in Egypt, the Indus Valley, and China during the 3rd millennium BC corresponds chronologically to the Mesopotamian flood event and suggests coordinated re-establishment of human civilization by surviving Apkallu and their human associates. The technological capabilities demonstrated by these early civilizations exceed what should have been possible for societies rebuilding from catastrophic destruction. The Egyptian flood traditions preserved in the pyramid texts describe Thoth's role in preserving divine wisdom through a great inundation that preceded the establishment of pharaonic civilization. The texts indicate that Thoth, whose characteristics correspond closely to the Mesopotamian Enki, maintained archives of essential knowledge in sealed chambers beneath sacred sites throughout Egypt. These archives contained astronomical calculations, mathematical formulas, and technological specifications that enabled the rapid development of Egyptian civilization following the catastrophe. The pyramid text of Pepi II describes how Thoth gathered the writings of the gods and preserved them in the House of Books before the Great Flood covered the land. The text indicates that this preservation effort involved not only written records, but also the training of selected priests in advanced knowledge systems that could be transmitted orally across generations. These priest initiates served as living libraries who could reconstruct technological capabilities even if physical archives were destroyed. The Hermetic texts, attributed to Thoth in his Greek form as Hermes Trismegistus, preserve detailed accounts of pre-flood technological capabilities and the methods used to preserve this knowledge through catastrophic periods. The Emerald Tablet describes principles of matter manipulation that correspond to capabilities attributed to the Mesopotamian Apkallu, while other Hermetic works provide specific instructions for reconstructing advanced technologies using basic materials and tools. The technological knowledge preserved through the flood included metallurgical techniques that enabled rapid advancement in toolmaking and construction capabilities. The post-flood civilizations demonstrated immediate access to bronze-working methods that typically required centuries of gradual development. The precision and sophistication of early bronze artifacts from Egypt, Mesopotamia, and the Indus Valley indicate that metallurgical knowledge was preserved intact through the catastrophe, rather than being rediscovered through experimentation. The astronomical knowledge preserved through the flood enabled post-Diluvian civilizations to establish accurate calendar systems and predict celestial events with remarkable precision. The Mayan calendar system, the Egyptian civil calendar, and the Mesopotamian astronomical tablets all demonstrate understanding of celestial mechanics that required sophisticated mathematical calculations and long-term observational data. The consistency of these systems across different cultures suggests derivation from common, preserved sources rather than independent development. The architectural knowledge preserved through the flood appears in the sudden emergence of megalithic construction techniques across multiple civilizations during the early 3rd millennium BC. The precision stone-cutting methods used at sites like Sacsayhuaman in Peru, the Giza Plateau in Egypt, and Göbekli Tepe in Turkey demonstrate access to advanced tools and techniques that survived the catastrophic period. These construction methods appear fully developed rather than showing gradual evolution from simpler techniques. The mathematical knowledge preserved through the flood included geometric principles that appear in the architectural layouts of early post-flood civilizations. The proportional relationships found in Egyptian pyramids, Mesopotamian ziggurats, and Indus Valley urban planning demonstrate understanding of advanced mathematical concepts that required sophisticated theoretical development. The consistency of these mathematical principles across different cultures indicates preservation from common sources rather than independent discovery. The medical knowledge preserved through the flood included surgical techniques and pharmaceutical preparations that exceeded conventional ancient capabilities. The Edwin Smith Papyrus and similar medical texts from other early civilizations demonstrate understanding of anatomical principles and treatment methods that suggest preservation of advanced medical knowledge from pre-flood sources. The sophistication of these medical systems indicates that healing knowledge was among the priority information preserved by the Apkallu. The agricultural knowledge preserved through the flood enabled rapid development of intensive farming systems that supported large urban populations. The irrigation techniques used in early Mesopotamian, Egyptian and Indus Valley civilizations demonstrate understanding of hydraulic principles that required advanced engineering calculations. These systems appear immediately after the flood period in fully developed form, suggesting preservation of complete agricultural technologies rather than gradual redevelopment. The linguistic evidence for knowledge preservation appears in the technical vocabulary shared across early post-flood civilizations. Terms for advanced technologies, mathematical concepts, and astronomical phenomena show common derivation across languages that had no apparent historical contact. This shared technical vocabulary indicates that preserved knowledge was transmitted using standardized terminology that maintained consistency across different cultural contexts. The genetic evidence for selective preservation appears in the distinctive characteristics of ruling dynasties in early post-flood civilizations. Archaeological analysis of royal remains from Egypt, Mesopotamia, and other early civilizations reveals genetic markers that distinguish these individuals from general populations. These genetic patterns suggest that the preservation effort included not only technological knowledge, but also specific human bloodlines that carried enhanced capabilities necessary for rebuilding advanced civilizations. The architectural revolution that transformed the Mesopotamian landscape during the 4th millennium BC represents far more than religious expression. It constituted a systematic network of communication installations designed to maintain contact between terrestrial administrators and their celestial supervisors. The ziggurats that dominated Sumerian city-states functioned as artificial mountains, replicating the sacred peaks where divine beings had first established contact with human civilization. These massive structures incorporated sophisticated acoustic properties, astronomical alignments, and geometric proportions that enable them to serve as technological interfaces between earthly and cosmic domains. The Anu ziggurat at Uruk, dating to approximately 3200 BC, demonstrates construction techniques that exceed conventional ancient building capabilities. The structure rises in 7 distinct levels, each oriented to specific stellar configurations that were significant in Mesopotamian cosmology. Archaeological analysis conducted by the German Oriental Society revealed that the ziggurat's internal chambers contain acoustic resonance properties tuned to specific frequencies. Sound tests performed within these chambers demonstrate amplification effects that would enable communication across vast distances, suggesting that the builders possessed advanced understanding of acoustic engineering principles. The foundation platform of the Anu ziggurat incorporates massive limestone blocks fitted together with precision measured in millimeters. These foundation stones, some weighing over 50 tons, were quarried from sites located hundreds of kilometers from Uruk and transported using methods that remain unexplained by conventional archaeology. The mathematical relationships governing the ziggurat's proportions correspond to astronomical constants that appear in later Greek and Egyptian architectural systems, indicating transmission of standardized building principles across ancient civilizations. The internal structure of Mesopotamian ziggurats reveals sophisticated engineering that served functional rather than merely ceremonial purposes. The Atemenanki ziggurat at Babylon, described in detail by Herodotus during the 5th century BC, contained a complex system of internal chambers, ventilation shafts, and drainage channels that maintained specific environmental conditions within the structure. Cuneiform texts describe these chambers as houses of the gods, where divine beings could manifest in physical form during communication sessions with human administrators. The acoustic properties of ziggurat chambers demonstrate understanding of sound manipulation that parallels modern acoustic engineering principles. The Marduk Temple at Babylon incorporated resonance chambers that amplified specific vocal frequencies while dampening others, creating communication conditions that enhanced the clarity of transmitted information. Babylonian ritual texts describe how priests used these acoustic properties to establish contact with celestial beings, employing vocal techniques that activated the ziggurat's communication capabilities. The astronomical alignments incorporated into ziggurat design reveal coordination with celestial phenomena that required sophisticated observational capabilities. The Nana ziggurat at Ur aligns precisely with the lunar standstill cycle, a complex astronomical phenomenon that occurs every 18.6 years when the Moon reaches its extreme northern and southern positions on the horizon. The mathematical calculations required to predict and incorporate this alignment indicate access to astronomical data spanning multiple centuries of observations. The stellar alignments of Mesopotamian temples extend beyond simple cardinal directions to encompass complex relationships with stellar movements that were significant in Anunnaki cosmology. The Enlil Temple at Nippur incorporates alignments to the constellation known as the Way of Enlil, which encompass stars in the northern celestial hemisphere that were associated with atmospheric phenomena and weather control. The precision of these alignments required understanding of precession effects and stellar proper motion that would not be formally recognized until the Hellenistic period. The Iabzu Temple at Eridu represents the architectural prototype that established the fundamental principles governing all subsequent Mesopotamian sacred construction. Archaeological excavations conducted by Fuad Safar between 1946 and 1949 revealed 17 distinct building levels at the site, with the earliest structures dating to approximately 5000 BC. These early levels demonstrate architectural sophistication that appears fully developed rather than showing gradual evolution from simpler building techniques. The Iabzu Temple's foundation extends deep into the earth, reaching the water table that the Sumerians identified as the Abzu, the freshwater ocean beneath the earth that served as Enki's primary domain. The temple's underground chambers were designed to maintain direct contact with this subterranean water source, incorporating hydraulic systems that regulated water flow according to astronomical cycles. Cuneiform texts describe these chambers as communication centers where Enki could manifest to provide guidance and technological instruction to human administrators. The geometric proportions governing Iabzu temple construction incorporate mathematical relationships that appear throughout ancient sacred architecture. The structure's dimensions correspond to astronomical constants, including the precession cycle, the lunar month, and the solar year, encoded in proportional relationships that demonstrate advanced mathematical knowledge. These same proportional systems appear in Egyptian pyramid construction and Greek temple design, indicating transmission of standardized architectural principles from Mesopotamian sources. The hydraulic engineering incorporated into the Iabzu temple demonstrates understanding of water management principles that required sophisticated technical knowledge. The temple's underground channels were carved through solid rock, using techniques that achieved smooth surfaces and precise gradients necessary for optimal water flow. The engineering calculations required for this system indicate access to surveying equipment and mathematical tools that exceed conventional ancient capabilities. The shared astronomical knowledge between Mesopotamian and Egyptian priest astronomers becomes apparent through comparative analysis of their observational records and predictive capabilities. The Venus tablets of Amisaduqa, dating to approximately 1650 BC, preserve Mesopotamian astronomical observations that demonstrate understanding of planetary cycles with precision that matches Egyptian astronomical texts from the same period. The consistency of these observations across different cultures indicates coordination between astronomical institutions that shared common knowledge sources. The precession cycle, requiring approximately 26,000 years to complete, appears in both Mesopotamian and Egyptian astronomical calculations with identical mathematical formulations. The Mesopotamian text known as the Astrolabe of Amisaduqa contains precession calculations that correspond precisely to those found in Egyptian sources such as the Dendera zodiac. The mathematical sophistication required for these calculations exceeds what should have been possible for ancient civilizations working independently, suggesting access to preserved knowledge from earlier sources. The stellar calendar systems developed by Mesopotamian and Egyptian astronomers demonstrate coordination that extends beyond shared mathematical techniques to include synchronized timing of religious and administrative activities. The Mesopotamian calendar, based on the heliacal rising of Sirius, corresponds exactly to the Egyptian Sothic calendar, with both systems incorporating leap day adjustments that maintain accuracy over extended periods. This coordination indicates communication between astronomical institutions that enabled synchronized planning across vast geographical distances. The constellation systems used by Mesopotamian and Egyptian astronomers show remarkable consistency in star groupings and mythological associations that suggest derivation from common sources. The Mesopotamian three ways of heaven, the paths of Anu, Enlil, and Enki, correspond precisely to the Egyptian division of the sky into northern, central, and southern regions associated with specific deities. The star catalogues preserved in both traditions contain identical stellar positions and magnitude estimates that indicate shared observational databases. The eclipse prediction capabilities demonstrated by both Mesopotamian and Egyptian astronomers required understanding of complex mathematical relationships that governed lunar and solar cycles. The Saros cycle, an 18-year period that enables accurate eclipse prediction, appears in astronomical texts from both cultures with identical mathematical formulations. The precision of these predictions indicates access to observational records spanning multiple centuries, suggesting institutional continuity that preserved astronomical knowledge across extended time periods. The technological instruments described in Mesopotamian and Egyptian astronomical texts demonstrate shared understanding of observational equipment that enhance their predictive capabilities. The Mesopotamian text known as the Astrolabe of Nabu describes instruments for measuring stellar positions and planetary movements that correspond to devices mentioned in Egyptian astronomical papyri. These instruments incorporated optical principles and mechanical mechanisms that required advanced understanding of physics and engineering. The mathematical techniques used by Mesopotamian and Egyptian astronomers for calculating celestial phenomena demonstrate shared knowledge of advanced computational methods. The base 60 numerical system developed in Mesopotamia appears in Egyptian astronomical calculations, while Egyptian geometric techniques for calculating areas and volumes appear in Mesopotamian architectural texts. This cross-cultural mathematical exchange indicates sustained intellectual contact between scholarly institutions in both regions. The temple orientation systems used in both cultures demonstrate coordination that extends beyond astronomical alignments to include shared symbolic and functional principles. The east-west orientation of Egyptian temples corresponds to the directional alignments of Mesopotamian ziggurats, with both systems incorporating specific angular adjustments that account for local geographical conditions while maintaining cosmic relationships. The mathematical calculations required for these adjustments indicate access to sophisticated surveying techniques and geographical knowledge. The ritual calendar systems developed by both cultures demonstrate synchronization that enabled coordinated religious and administrative activities across vast distances. The timing of major festivals in both Mesopotamian and Egyptian calendars corresponds to identical astronomical phenomena, including planetary conjunctions, stellar heliacal risings, and lunar phases. This coordination suggests communication networks that enabled real-time coordination of ceremonial activities between distant temple complexes. The preservation of astronomical knowledge through institutional structures in both cultures demonstrates similar organizational principles that ensured continuity across political disruptions and dynastic changes. The temple schools established in both Mesopotamia and Egypt maintained identical curricula for training astronomer priests, including mathematical techniques, observational methods, and predictive calculations. The consistency of these educational systems across different cultures indicates derivation from standardized knowledge sources. The architectural evidence for communication systems within temple complexes reveals technological capabilities that enabled coordination between distant sites. The acoustic properties of temple chambers in both cultures demonstrate understanding of sound transmission principles that could facilitate long-distance communication. The geometric relationships governing temple construction incorporate mathematical constants that would enable structural resonance effects capable of transmitting information across extended distances. The metallurgical knowledge required for constructing astronomical instruments appears simultaneously in both Mesopotamian and Egyptian contexts, indicating shared access to advanced technological information. The bronze and copper alloys used for precision instruments in both cultures demonstrate identical composition ratios and manufacturing techniques that required sophisticated understanding of metallurgical principles. The sudden appearance of these advanced metallurgical capabilities in both regions suggests transmission from common technological sources rather than independent development. The optical knowledge demonstrated in astronomical instruments from both cultures indicates understanding of light manipulation principles that enhanced observational capabilities. The crystal lenses discovered in Mesopotamian archaeological contexts correspond to similar optical devices found in Egyptian temple complexes, with both types demonstrating precision grinding and polishing techniques that required advanced tool-making capabilities. The mathematical principles governing lens curvature in both traditions indicate shared understanding of optical physics. The recording systems used by both cultures for preserving astronomical observations demonstrate identical organizational principles and data storage methods. The astronomical diaries maintained by Mesopotamian temple complexes correspond in format and content to Egyptian astronomical records, with both systems using standardized notation methods and measurement units. The consistency of these recording systems across different cultures indicates establishment of common protocols for astronomical data collection and preservation. The dissolution of the ancient Mesopotamian temple complexes did not mark the end of the knowledge systems established by the Anunnaki and their human intermediaries. Instead, these traditions underwent a systematic transformation that preserved their essential elements while adapting them to new cultural and political contexts. The Babylonian mystery schools that emerged during the Neo-Babylonian period served as the primary vehicles for this transmission, maintaining the astronomical, mathematical, and technological knowledge that had been accumulated over millennia of divine human collaboration. The Babylonian mystery schools operated within the temple complexes of Marduk at Babylon and Nabu at Borsippa, where initiated priests preserved the most sensitive aspects of ancient knowledge through carefully structured educational programs. The curriculum of these schools, as documented in administrative tablets from the Seleucid period, included advanced mathematical techniques, astronomical calculation methods, and metallurgical formulas that derived directly from the knowledge systems established by the Apkallu. Students underwent rigorous training that could extend for decades, learning not only theoretical principles, but also practical applications of technologies that remained far in advance of conventional ancient capabilities. The initiation processes employed by these mystery schools incorporated elements that directly parallel the transformation procedures described in Sumerian texts regarding human enhancement by divine beings. Initiates underwent physical and mental conditioning that enhanced their cognitive capabilities and extended their lifespans beyond normal human parameters. The Greek historian Berosus, himself a graduate of the Babylonian mystery schools, describes these enhancement procedures as involving exposure to specific frequencies of sound and light that activated dormant genetic potential within selected individuals. The mathematical knowledge preserved by Babylonian mystery schools formed the foundation for later Hermetic and Gnostic systems that would influence European intellectual development for centuries. The geometric principles encoded in Babylonian astronomical texts appear in virtually identical form in the Hermetic corpus attributed to Hermes Trismegistus, including the mathematical relationships that govern planetary movements and the proportional constants that determine optimal architectural layouts for sacred structures. The transmission of this mathematical knowledge occurred through direct instruction of Greek students who travelled to Babylon to study under Chaldean masters. The astronomical knowledge maintained by Babylonian schools provided the technical foundation for the astrological systems that became central to Hellenistic and Roman mystery traditions. The precise planetary ephemerides calculated by Babylonian astronomers enabled accurate prediction of celestial events that were interpreted as divine communications in later Hermetic and Gnostic systems. The mathematical techniques used for these calculations, including the base 60 numerical system and sophisticated interpolation methods, were preserved intact through the transmission process, and appear in medieval European astronomical texts without modification. The metallurgical knowledge preserved by mystery schools included alchemical techniques that enabled the production of materials with properties that exceeded conventional ancient capabilities. The copper and bronze alloys described in Babylonian technical texts demonstrate composition ratios and manufacturing processes that required understanding of chemical principles not formally recognized until the modern period. These metallurgical formulas were transmitted to Alexandrian scholars who incorporated them into the earliest alchemical treatises, establishing the technical foundation for medieval European alchemy. The transition from Babylonian mystery schools to Alexandrian institutions occurred during the Hellenistic period, when Greek scholars gained access to Mesopotamian temple libraries following Alexander's conquest of the Persian Empire. The Library of Alexandria became the primary repository for translated Mesopotamian texts, with scholars like Apollodorus of Athens and Seleucus of Seleucia working to render cuneiform technical treatises into Greek. These translations preserved not only the theoretical content of Mesopotamian knowledge, but also the practical instructions necessary for implementing advanced technologies. The Hermetic texts that emerged from Alexandria during the Roman period demonstrate direct continuity with Mesopotamian traditions regarding divine beings and their technological capabilities. The Corpus Hermeticum describes beings called demons who possessed knowledge of natural forces and the ability to manipulate matter according to divine principles. These entities correspond precisely to the Mesopotamian Apkallu in their attributed capabilities and their role as intermediaries between celestial and terrestrial domains. The technological knowledge attributed to these beings includes methods for transmuting base metals, extending human lifespans, and communicating across vast distances through technological means. The Gnostic systems that developed parallel to Hermetic traditions incorporated Mesopotamian concepts of divine watchers into their cosmological frameworks, though with significant theological modifications. The Gnostic archons described in texts like the Apocryphon of John correspond to the rebellious Igigi of Mesopotamian tradition, portrayed as beings who exceeded their authority and corrupted human development through unauthorized genetic manipulation. The Gnostic emphasis on hidden knowledge and the need for spiritual liberation from material constraints reflects the Mesopotamian tradition of preserving advanced knowledge within restricted circles of initiated individuals. The influence of Mesopotamian watcher traditions on Jewish angelology becomes apparent through detailed analysis of post-exilic Hebrew literature and its development of complex hierarchical systems governing celestial beings. The Book of Enoch, composed during the Second Temple period, preserves detailed accounts of angelic hierarchies that correspond precisely to the administrative structures described in Mesopotamian texts regarding Anunnaki governance. The specific names and functions assigned to archangels in Jewish tradition derive directly from Mesopotamian sources, with Michael corresponding to the Mesopotamian Marduk, Gabriel to Nabu, and Raphael to Ninurta. The technological capabilities attributed to angels in Jewish literature mirror those assigned to the Mesopotamian Apkallu, including the ability to manipulate natural forces, provide advanced knowledge to selected humans, and maintain surveillance over human activities. The Book of Jubilees describes how angels taught Noah the principles of medicine, astronomy, and agriculture necessary for rebuilding civilization after the flood. These teachings correspond precisely to the domains of knowledge attributed to specific Apkallu in Mesopotamian sources, indicating direct transmission of these traditions through Jewish scribal schools. The development of Christian angelology incorporated Jewish traditions regarding divine watchers, while adapting them to Christian theological frameworks. The pseudo-Dionysian hierarchy of angels, established during the 5th century AD, organized celestial beings into 9 orders that correspond to the administrative levels described in Mesopotamian texts regarding Anunnaki governance. The specific functions assigned to each order of angels mirror the territorial and technological responsibilities attributed to different classes of divine beings and cuneiform sources. The Christian tradition of guardian angels derives directly from Mesopotamian concepts of individual divine watchers assigned to monitor and guide specific human beings. The early Christian text known as the Shepherd of Hermas describes these guardian beings as possessing detailed knowledge of human activities and the ability to provide technological and spiritual assistance when properly invoked. The methods described for communicating with guardian angels correspond to techniques preserved in Mesopotamian ritual texts for establishing contact with personal protective deities. The influence of Mesopotamian traditions on Islamic angelology appears in the detailed descriptions of angelic hierarchies and functions preserved in early Islamic literature. The Quran's description of angels as beings created from light who serve as divine messengers corresponds to Mesopotamian accounts of the Igigi as luminous beings who transmitted information between celestial and terrestrial domains. The specific angels named in Islamic tradition, including Jibril, Mikael, and Israfil, derive from the same Mesopotamian sources that influenced Jewish and Christian angelology. The Islamic tradition of the Watchers, known as Raqib, incorporates Mesopotamian concepts of divine surveillance over human activities. Islamic texts describe these beings as maintaining detailed records of human actions and possessing the ability to observe multiple locations simultaneously. The technological capabilities attributed to these beings include methods for instantaneous communication and the ability to manipulate physical matter according to divine will, corresponding precisely to abilities assigned to Mesopotamian watchers in cuneiform sources. The development of Islamic demonology also demonstrates clear influence from Mesopotamian traditions regarding rebellious divine beings. The Quranic account of Iblis and his followers corresponds to Mesopotamian narratives describing the rebellion of certain Igigi against established divine authority. The specific capabilities attributed to these fallen beings, including the ability to assume various forms and to influence human behavior through technological means, mirror the characteristics assigned to banished Apkallu in Mesopotamian texts. Archaeological discoveries continue to reveal new connections between ancient Near Eastern civilizations and their shared mythological frameworks, providing physical evidence for the transmission of knowledge systems across cultural boundaries. The recent excavations at Göbekli Tepe in southeastern Turkey have uncovered megalithic structures dating to approximately 9,500 BC that demonstrate construction techniques and astronomical alignments that parallel those found in later Mesopotamian and Egyptian sites. The precision stone-cutting methods used at Göbekli Tepe require tools and techniques that exceed conventional Neolithic capabilities, suggesting access to advanced technological knowledge that was preserved and transmitted across millennia. The iconographic elements carved into the Göbekli Tepe pillars include representations of beings that correspond to descriptions of the Mesopotamian Anunnaki and Apkallu. These figures are portrayed as humanoid but taller than ordinary humans, wearing distinctive garments that appear to be technological rather than ceremonial in nature, and carrying objects that resemble sophisticated tools or instruments. The artistic style and symbolic content of these carvings show clear continuity with later Mesopotamian iconographic traditions, indicating cultural transmission that spanned thousands of years. The underwater archaeological discoveries off the coasts of India, Japan, and the Mediterranean have revealed submerged structures that demonstrate advanced architectural knowledge and construction techniques that predate known civilizations by millennia. The Yonaguni monument off the coast of Japan exhibits precision stone-cutting and geometric layouts that correspond to architectural principles found in Mesopotamian and Egyptian sacred sites. The mathematical relationships governing the structure's proportions include the same astronomical constants that appear in later temple complexes, suggesting derivation from common knowledge sources. The genetic studies of ancient populations have revealed patterns of migration and cultural contact that support the textual evidence for knowledge transmission between ancient civilizations. DNA analysis of remains from early Mesopotamian, Egyptian and Indus Valley sites shows genetic markers that indicate sustained contact between these populations, despite the vast distances separating their territories. These genetic patterns correspond to the periods when advanced technological knowledge appears simultaneously in multiple regions, supporting the historical accounts of coordinated development under divine guidance. Modern esoteric interpretations of ancient Sumerian texts have generated new perspectives on the nature of prehistoric advanced civilizations and their relationship to contemporary human development. Scholars like Zessuria Sitchin and Michael Tellinger have proposed that the Anunnaki represent extraterrestrial beings who established mining operations on Earth and genetically modified human beings to serve as workers. While these interpretations remain controversial within academic circles, they have stimulated renewed interest in Mesopotamian literature and encouraged more detailed analysis of the technological knowledge preserved in cuneiform texts. The translation work conducted by contemporary Assyriologists has revealed previously unknown technical details in Mesopotamian texts that support interpretations of advanced prehistoric technologies. The mathematical tablets from Babylon contain computational techniques that demonstrate understanding of concepts like logarithms, trigonometric functions, and calculus principles that were not supposed to be known until much later historical periods. These mathematical capabilities suggest access to knowledge systems that far exceeded conventional ancient educational institutions. The astronomical knowledge preserved in Mesopotamian texts includes precise calculations of planetary movements and stellar positions that require observational capabilities beyond what should have been possible for ancient civilizations. The Venus tablets of Amisaduqa contain predictions of planetary positions with accuracy that matches modern astronomical calculations, indicating access to sophisticated observational equipment or alternative methods for obtaining astronomical data. These capabilities support interpretations of the Anunnaki as technologically advanced beings who possess scientific knowledge far beyond ancient human capabilities. The metallurgical knowledge described in Mesopotamian technical texts includes alloy compositions and manufacturing processes that produce materials with properties that exceed conventional ancient capabilities. Recent attempts to replicate these ancient formulas have produced metals with characteristics that approach modern high-performance alloys, suggesting that ancient metallurgists possessed understanding of chemical principles that were not formally recognized until the industrial period. These technological capabilities indicate that prehistoric civilizations had access to knowledge systems that were far more advanced than conventional historical models suggest. The impact of these discoveries on contemporary understanding of human development has been profound, challenging conventional models of technological and cultural evolution. The evidence for advanced knowledge systems in prehistoric civilizations suggests that human development has not followed a simple linear progression from primitive to sophisticated, but rather has involved periods of advanced achievement followed by catastrophic decline and gradual recovery. This cyclical model of civilizational development corresponds to the accounts preserved in ancient texts regarding periodic interventions by advanced beings who provided technological assistance during critical periods. The preservation of ancient knowledge through secret societies and esoteric traditions has ensured the survival of technological and spiritual information that would otherwise have been lost during periods of civilizational collapse. The Masonic traditions that emerged during the medieval period incorporated geometric and architectural knowledge that derives directly from ancient temple-building traditions, preserving mathematical principles and construction techniques that enabled the construction of Gothic cathedrals and other architectural achievements. These traditions maintain continuity with the knowledge systems established by the ancient mystery schools, ensuring that essential information remains available for future reconstruction efforts. The contemporary revival of interest in ancient wisdom traditions has led to new attempts to understand and implement the technological knowledge preserved in ancient texts. Research groups around the world are working to decipher and test the technical instructions contained in Mesopotamian, Egyptian, and other ancient sources, with some success in replicating ancient metallurgical processes and architectural techniques. These efforts demonstrate that the knowledge preserved in ancient texts represents genuine technological information rather than mythological speculation. The implications of this hidden stream of ancient wisdom for contemporary human development remain profound and largely unexplored. The evidence suggests that human civilization has access to knowledge systems that could revolutionize current technological capabilities and provide solutions to contemporary challenges in energy production, materials science, and environmental management.